In 53 BC, 10,000 Roman soldiers were captured at the edge of the known world. When Rome finally came looking for them 33 years later, they'd vanished. 2,000 years later, at the edge of China's Gobi Desert, there's a village where some of the farmers have green eyes and fair hair. In 1957, a professor at Oxford thought he knew why. He believed they were the last descendants of Rome's lost army. Hi, I'm Harriet. Welcome back to the channel. This is the story of how a lost Roman army became a lost Chinese village, and it starts with one man reading an ancient book. Homer Hasselflug Dubbs was not your typical Oxford professor. He was the son of American missionaries, raised in Hunan province, and had returned to China as a missionary himself before turning to academia. He was reportedly extremely eccentric. He parked his motorcycle in the college hallways, reportedly dabbled in the occult, and was once described as a man so lost in ideas he wouldn't even iron his pants. He was, in other words, exactly the sort of person who would find Romans in China. He'd spent years translating Ban Gu's Book of Han, one of the great chronicles of Chinese history, when one passage stopped him in his tracks. A battle fought in 36 BC in what is now Kazakhstan, where a Han Chinese general named Chen Tang had attacked a warlord's fortress near the Talus River. Buried in Ban Gu's account of the siege, Dubbs found a description of soldiers at the fortress gate, lined up in a fish-scale formation, practicing military drill with round shields. Outside the walls, a wooden palisade had been built in front of the main fortification. Now, to most readers, it was an unremarkable detail in an ancient Chinese battle report. To Dubbs, it was unmistakable. He started to believe that the fish-scale formation was the Roman testudo. The palisade was a Roman construction technique, and the roughly 145 soldiers captured at this battle were Roman prisoners of war. But then, if they were Roman prisoners of war, they were 4,000 miles from Rome. Now that needed an explanation. So Dubbs went looking for one, and what he found was a disaster. 17 years before that battle in Kazakhstan, in 53 BC, the wealthiest man in Rome had decided to become its greatest general. Marcus Licinius Crassus marched roughly 43,000 Roman soldiers into the flat, scorching plains of Mesopotamia. He was looking for military glory to match his political rivals, Caesar and Pompey. The Senate hadn't authorized the campaign. Near the town of Carrhae, which is modern-day Haran in Turkey, he walked into a Parthian force of roughly 10,000 cavalry under a general named Serena. It shouldn't have been manageable, and it wasn't. And so the battle went like this. The Parthian horse archers circled the exhausted Roman infantry and fired into them for hours under a relentless desert sun. By nightfall, the army that had marched in 43,000 strong was broken. Around 20,000 Romans were dead. Crassus himself was killed during fake peace negotiations. But Dubbs wasn't interested in the dead. He was interested in the survivors. What happened next was deliberate humiliation. The Parthians found the Roman prisoner who looked most like Crassus, dressed him in a woman's royal robe, and paraded him through the streets of Seleucia on horseback. Other prisoners were forced to march behind, hailing him as Imperator, while severed Roman heads hung from the lictors' rods. It was a calculated mockery of everything Rome held sacred. After the spectacle, the 10,000 surviving prisoners were marched east. Now, according to Pliny the Elder, they were transported to Merv, a remote garrison city on the far northeastern frontier of the Parthian Empire. That's already a very long way east of Rome, and Dubbs noticed, a very long way closer to China. 33 years later, Augustus negotiated the return of the captured legionary standards. But when he asked for the prisoners, the Parthians told him there were none to return. After 3 decades, they'd simply vanished. And that was what Dubbs had been looking for, a gap. So let's follow the chain. Romans captured at Carrhae, sent to Merv, ending up fighting as mercenaries in Central Asia, captured again by the Chinese, and settled on the frontier in a place called Liqian. Now, that's a place name that Dubs pointed out was an ancient Chinese term for the Greco-Roman world, possibly derived from the word Alexandria. Each link is individually plausible, and in 1957, when he published the theory, nobody could quite prove him wrong. Dubs died in 1969, still at Oxford, and his 1,000-page translation of the Book of Han sat unfinished on his desk. He never saw anyone test his theory, but the theory outlived him. And decades later, an Australian scholar named David Harris and a retired Chinese professor went looking for that village. When Dubs's theory finally reached China in the 1990s, it landed in a very specific place, a village called Zhalaizhai, sitting at the edge of the Gobi Desert on a road that has carried people between east and west for thousands of years. The area has fewer than 100 households, surrounded by dust, low buildings, and farmland that looks like it's arguing with the climate. But when the outsiders arrived, they noticed something immediately. Some of the faces didn't fit in. A man named Sai Junyan had brown hair, green eyes, and ruddy skin. His friends had actually nicknamed him Sai Lo Ma, or Sai the Roman. His great-grandfather had once even told him about Roman tombs in the Liqian mountains, roughly a day and a half's walk away. But Sai had never connected that family story to his own appearance. As he put it, people simply thought he had a skin problem, and there were other people in the town who looked slightly different. Song Gorong stood 6 feet tall with wavy hair and a long hooked nose. And one family's daughter had been born with blonde hair so unusual that they actually shaved it off, but it grew back the same colour. Now, of course, none of this is proof of anything. In 2005, it looked like the science might just close the gap. Reports started circulating that claimed that DNA tests on some of the Liqian villages showed signs of Western Eurasian ancestry. Unsurprisingly, the media picked this up immediately. Suddenly, the theory wasn't just academic. It felt like a real answer had arrived. And then this theory reached out and touched someone's life. Sai Junyan, the green-eyed farmer, was flown to the Italian consulate in Shanghai. He was introduced to Italian diplomats and journalists as a living descendant of Rome's lost legion. He had his photo taken and people shook his hand. The man whose neighbours once assumed he had a skin condition was being told he was the son of Rome. For the people of Liqian, the legend had become real, and they ran with it. Of course, this didn't happen overnight. It started small. The village changed its name from Zhalaizhai to Liqian, and granite statues of ancient Roman soldiers went up near the highway. Then local officials, sensing tourist potential, went further. A full replica Roman town was built there. So imagine 120,000 square metres of Romanesque architecture with more than 1,000 pillars, a Roman-style hotel, and the temple with bronze doors carved with images of Roman people on one side and Chinese bodhisattva on the other. For a theory born in an Oxford lecture hall, that is quite a lot of concrete. And naturally, of course, there's also a Caesar karaoke bar there. Villagers even began wearing replica Roman armour for tourists. Each step was a bigger bet on a theory that had never been really tested, which makes what happens next all the more difficult. What if the whole thing is wrong? Let's go through and test the pillars of Dubs' theory one by one. And the best place to start is with the simplest question. If Roman soldiers lived here, where is their stuff? Romans tended to leave a mark. At Liqian, they apparently left nothing. Despite decades of interest, no Roman artefacts have ever been found at the site. No coins, weapons, pottery, armour, no religious objects. Not a single physical trace of Rome has turned up in the ground around this village. There are 2 problems with the DNA. First, Western Eurasian ancestry doesn't obviously mean Roman ancestry. In a region shaped by centuries of movement across Central Asia, It could point to many different contacts, migrations, and mixed ancestries, and not neatly back to Crassus's lost men. Second, the stronger genetic evidence of 2007 didn't support the Roman theory. A published Y chromosome study found that 77% of Liqian paternal lineages were restricted to East Asia, and that the population clustered closely with Chinese groups, especially Han Chinese. The authors concluded that a Roman mercenary origin couldn't be accepted from the paternal genetic evidence. So what about the fish scale formation, the keystone of his entire theory? Well, that turns out not to be unique. According to Wang Shuquan's 2012 analysis, the phrase that had electrified Dubs in his Oxford study was simply a common Chinese metaphor for soldiers standing in close alignment. It appears in earlier Chinese military texts, long before any possible Roman contact. So let's move on to his theory for the name. Dubs linked Liqian to older Chinese names for the far west, including Alexandria and Daqin, the Chinese name for Rome. But Daqin was a broad term for the Roman world, and sometimes for the Near East more generally. So even if the name points west, it doesn't point neatly to Crassus's missing soldiers. Remember that Augustus got the legionary standards back, but no prisoners. Supporters of Dubs' claim used that absence as evidence. If the soldiers weren't in Parthia anymore, they must have gone east. Critics say it simply means that after 33 years, they died or been absorbed to local populations. The absence proves nothing except that these men were genuinely lost. So the European features are real, but the explanation is almost certainly not Rome. But this is where a bigger mystery opens up. The road that runs past Liqian is not some quiet rural backwater. It's part of the Hu-Shi corridor, one of the oldest and busiest migration routes on Earth. For thousands of years, every traveller, merchant and soldier moving between China and the West has passed through this narrow strip of land. And recent studies have found something remarkable. The Tarim Mummies, Caucasian-featured remains from further west in Xinjiang, don't descend from European migrants at all. They descend from ancient North Eurasians, people who disappeared from its landscape long before any Romans set foot outside Italy. Cai Junyan's green eyes are real. They're still there whether Rome put them there or not. Something about this place and about these people genuinely doesn't match the surrounding population, and that's been true for generations. So what do you think? Did 10,000 Roman soldiers really walk to China? Did the Silk Road leave its mark on one small village? Or is there something else entirely buried in that desert, something nobody's found yet? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this, make sure you're subscribed and give the video a like, or even consider becoming a member. I'll see you next time.